The role of PCI is to engage with faculty across the university around their commercialization goals and activities, and to support them by working with partners in the private sector to facilitate all kinds of activities such as licensing, startup, strategic alliances, and corporate partnership. Today, I'm really pleased to have an amazing duo/team to talk about startups for engineers. First, we have my colleague, Michael Quazell, who's the Executive Director at PCI Ventures. He has been with Penn for a while now.
12 years.
Oh my goodness. Okay, 12 years. What's amazing is when Michael came to Penn, and that predates me by about 6 years, there was not a lot of startup activity, and he's had the pleasure and also been a great leader in facilitating a lot of startup activity across Penn. So he brings a wealth of experience in terms of working with very early stage ideas and kind of getting them structurally and strategically kind of out of the lab and at least, into the market initially. And with Michael, we have Manny Stockman, who works at Osage University Partners and Osage Ventures. They actually are a firm that is dedicated to working with universities on growing their early stage ideas. And Manny has worked with many faculty at Penn. He knows us well. He works very closely with Michael and his team, as well as Pam Beatrice, our Director of Licensing with the engineering school, and her team. He has a great background. He's a PhD engineer out of Princeton. He did his undergrad engineering work at Duke, and previously he worked at Lockheed Martin and Skunk Works. So I thought I would hand it over to Michael and Manny.
Great, thank you, Lori, and I'll share my screen so that we can look at some slides. What Manny and I decided we would do is go off of one set of slides, and then we'll both talk to those slides as we go along, interrupting each other as we go, which would be great. This is, as Lori said, from myself and Manny, and we'll talk about our different slides. I thought we'd start with just Manny giving a little bit of his background, and I'll give a little of mine.
Yeah, sure. So Lori, thank you for the introduction. Mostly background on OUP. So we're a venture capital fund. We started in Philadelphia basically along some ideas that came out of Penn, and I think Michael was there for the beginning of it as well in brainstorming around it. The sole thesis we have is we invest in university startups founded by faculty and grad students, and it came out of some realizations that some of the former tech transfer directors from Penn noticed in the startups that were spinning out, and it's since scaled. And we have partnerships with 100 universities. We're in our third fund, and we invest across a broad portfolio of startups ranging from life science, therapeutics, and device companies to where I live, which is more in the kind of hard tech side of things, in anything from semiconductors and photonics all the way through robotics, a little bit of clean tech and cybersecurity and enterprise software. So, while we invest across the entire life cycle of companies, we end up spending a lot of time through groups like Michael's and Lori and Pam's at the tech transfer office to engage with startups and faculty to help them brainstorm the right way to get to market. And we've seen thousands of spinouts, and we've learned a lot of lessons both in watching and then also losing money. And so, we always like to use these opportunities to share and just be a friendly VC for you all to talk to. So feel free to reach out to me outside of this meeting as well.
And I'm Michael Poisel. Manny and I actually have similar backgrounds, having both engineering degrees and both worked at Lockheed at one point. It's kind of interesting. We both ended up here in the same place. So just a little bit about what I do at Penn. I run PCI Ventures, which my team is focused on Upstart and Up Advisors, which is helping faculty to create companies around their research. We've been doing this now for 10 years. We started over 200 companies. We're probably about 220 5 exits. It's been a great program for the university, and we're excited to grow it and continue to see it improve from here. So I tend to start with this slide to make sure everybody knows, there's basically 2 things to do with your technology, out license or create a startup. What we're here to do today is talk about creating a startup company, but sometimes out licensing is the best way to go, and we never wanted to try to preach the pose one way or another. Creating a startup can simply be a means of getting some applied research dollars behind your research and then out licensing it later on. We all certainly understand that a license will be at the end of the process either way.
The tree of things that happen after you create a startup is also very interesting, right? So you can have, like what Michael was talking about, startups that end up having a way to work with the university still. There's businesses that end up being, modest but successful startups that don't need any venture capital, working off of, SBIR, STTR grants. And then there's the third leg of it, which is, going after a big venture capital round. And all of those businesses are great. And sometimes it's about understanding which one you should be and which one you want to be.
Yeah, and we always want to make sure that we're here for you guys to work through those kind of thoughts. So what is the best path for an invention and an idea? So here at Penn, everything starts with a Penn invention, and we start going from there. What I'm going to do is we'll go through each of these in more detail, but it goes from the Penn invention to the company formation. We can talk about the different structures, recruiting a team to run the company, developing the plan for the business. I call it more of a plan for a business than a business plan. Most people don't tend to write 60, 70-page business plans anymore, but we do need a plan for where we're going to go with it. And so I call it a plan for the business. And then capital acquisition, as Manny said, that can come in a lot of different forms. Maybe it's an SBIR grant, maybe it's economic development money, maybe it's a corporate partner. It's not just VC, but somehow, some way, we probably need to get some money behind the business. And then business operations, how you actually build a business. So we're going to go through each of these in more detail over the next half hour. Some of the basics, you have to name the company. It can be a lot of fun to come up with the name. Some people come with them predetermined. They've known what they want to name their company. Other people, we need to help. We have a lot of fun doing it and coming up with a cool branding name that's going to work with you for the foreseeable future. There's lots of different structures on how to start a company. And what I try to talk to people about is not getting lost in the noise of structures. There's LLCs, C Corps, S Corps, B Corps, nonprofits. Basically, the two that everybody focuses on these days is LLCs and C Corps. We tend to start companies here at Penn as LLCs because they're cheap and easy, but we certainly understand when we get to Manny that we're going to need to be a C Corp, and we'll convert the company at that point.
Yeah, I think we always like to think of this when it's coming to our attention, when a deal is kind of getting to startup form where they want investment, is if your team itself is not special or experienced and you're doing things for the first time, just keep it cookie cutter. Sometimes startups have try to create different structures around the company. I'm not going to spend too much time on it here, but there's so much risk that we're taking. We just like the business incorporation to be really vanilla. And unless you're a really experienced entrepreneur that's doing things like LLCs at scale, even after you raise venture dollars, there's reasons why that can be done, but usually it's just good to get a lawyer and say you want the plain vanilla company formation.
Yep. And the last thing on here is just to understand that when you start a company, there's an agreement that governs how the company will operate. It's either an LLC operating agreement or articles of formation, articles of incorporation, something to that effect. But the reason I highlighted here is just to talk about the importance of that document. It defines the rules, the voting rules of how the company's going to operate, who owns the company, what happens if one of the equity holders dies, what happens if they leave, all of those kind of things need to be outlined in that document, and you want to do it right up front. It only gets more complicated later on, and you want to make sure you have those rules defined.
Hey, Michael, this might be putting you on the spot, but maybe people in the audience would help. One thing I've never figured out and I keep meaning to is when you have out of the university space, people founding companies that are foreign nationals or not American citizens, or hiring non-American citizens, what's the right structure at the founding to build there? Is there any issues that people should pay attention to?
You know, we've found that an LLC still works. It's just a matter of understanding what are the visa rights of the person. Do they have a student visa versus a work visa? We've had companies that were started by people on student visas, and they can be the founder as long as they're not an employee. We've even gotten them 6-month kind of work visas that they can do, so they can work on the company for a while. If they want to kind of step away from the university to do that. There's different things we can do, but at the end of the day, we tend to put people toward an immigration attorney to make sure that we're not doing anything to jeopardize their process. We all know how long and arduous the immigration process can be, and we don't want to screw anything up by starting the company. The other challenge in terms of not being an American is that the company, in order to apply for an SBIR, needs to be 51% owned by American citizens. And so we sometimes have trouble with our companies that we go to file an SBIR and then realize that people aren't citizens that have founded the business. And that can create an issue. So those are some of the things we look out for. But I think, the structure of the business can still be pretty simple, straightforward.
I think it all points to leveraging the experiences from the PCI office and the tech transfer offices at any university to just leverage all that they've learned and seen all, umpteen different startups come through.
Yep. Yeah, we've seen about it all. So in terms of team recruitment, I think the important thing here is going out and looking for people that have complementary skill sets to the founders. Our founding teams are world-renowned scientists, but maybe they need somebody that has more business skills, who's maybe done this before, has connections with investors, things like that can be really important. And so it's always great to help to do that. Us at PCI Ventures, this is actually one of the tasks that we take upon ourselves and pride ourselves in, is helping faculty to find entrepreneurs to run their companies so that they don't have to. One of our goals is to allow you to be entrepreneurial without you having to be the entrepreneur. And this is something that we do as part of the service.
So first off, for any company out of the engineering school, which is most likely going to be in my area of expertise, the single most important thing that you'll have and that you'll need to raise money is a great team. I mean, it doesn't matter how great your science is or your technology is, team trumps all. And so, you should really be thinking about the roles in the team and be aware that, in any industry, but specifically university spinouts, the likely successful team is not going to, has historically not been led as a CEO in the long term by the professor or grad student that founded the company. And that's the reality of the data. And so it's important just to be aware of that. And we don't want necessarily that CEO doesn't have to be in place on day one. It's more about that level of modesty and introspection that we like to see in the researchers that are founding these companies. And so the way the PCI helps to approach it is the right way, which is to help track down the entrepreneurs that are needed, but fill in the gaps in that interim time. Because there's certain things about being a CEO, which once you realize it, you don't really, unless you're that type of person, you're not going to enjoy HR and paying the books and things like that. The other part of it that's also worth thinking about, this is a really interesting dynamic in spinouts between graduate students, postdocs and researchers, and then professors, is the founding equity of a company. And it's, think of that as on day one, how is the ownership of the company split up? It's an awkward conversation to have amongst, it's actually almost sometimes more awkward to have amongst good friends. But it's definitely an awkward conversation to have with your advisor, your PI advisor. And, once it becomes a startup, we don't really view a professor any differently than their former grad student who's now a part of the company as well. And so what we really focus on is making sure that the cap table, which governs who owns what in a company, is structured correctly. And the way to think of of that is, you want the people who have, when I'm looking at it for investment, the people who are most important to the company are incentivized to stay and work hard. And because salary is not easy to grow in a startup, you're just limited. The biggest incentive you have is ownership of the company. And so, we like to think of equity in our companies, the companies we're looking at, as having rewarded for past performance and then incentivizing future performance. And, when you form a company, you have multiple things that are in play. You have a professor maybe who's spent their life's work in developing the technology and science that has gone into the company. That's an important part of past performance. You have a graduate student or a postdoc who put several years into it. And then you have the other side, the future performance. And, for the most part, if the people are not going to be spending full time, 40, 80 hours a week with these company, with their startup, then you fit into this category of, contributors, but not on the operational side of the team. And so your equity position is not going to be as strong as if you had stayed with the company to work with them full time. And so sometimes that leads to professors not necessarily getting the 20, 25% ownership that some of their grad students may be receiving as a part of the same company. And it's really important to see that structure set up well at a company when we're looking at it. So we have a whole talk on this. If anyone wants to chat about it, I'm happy to discuss. It's awkward to have those conversations, but it's really important to set it up because you can't easily fix it.
Yeah, I think that it's such a great conversation, Manny, to have, because the advice we give people is to look ahead, don't look back. You need to be looking at who are the people that you need contributions from going forward and incentivize them. Because the other thing to remember is that most of these companies are going to be based on intellectual property. And if people are an inventor of the intellectual property, they're going to get remuneration and taken care of as part of the license and as part of the fact that they're an inventor. So you don't necessarily have to be thinking, oh, well, they were an inventor on this technology, they were a collaborator, we need to give them equity. Well, if they're not going to work on the company itself and moving forward contribute, maybe you give them a little bit, but don't give them as much as you might think that you need to, because they're going to, other ways they're going to get compensated, and you really want to save that equity for the people that are going to take the idea forward. I think Manny brings up an excellent point that we talk about. I've seen many situations where we've gotten a couple years into the company development and people scratch their heads and say, well, why did I give that person equity in the company? They haven't participated in any of the meetings. And that's, you'll learn to regret it as time goes on if you just try to be nice at the front and give out equity to people who maybe aren't going to be as bigger contributors going forward. It really is about incentivizing the future effort, because there will be a lot of effort and people should get compensated for that.
Yeah.
Great topic.
And then every so often, if you do find that right co-founder, let's say like non-academic co-founder, chief product officer, CEO, be prepared to incentivize them to join your company with a lot of equity, even though they haven't put the blood, sweat, and tears into developing the science at the lab. You want them to be motivated to stay. And so, let's just take roughly a 2 or 3 person academic founding team. That great entrepreneur could be worth 20% of your company easily. Yeah. And so it's a hard pill to swallow, but it's worth it. The thing we look for the most in funding a company is a team that's made venture investors money in the past, or has raised capital for a hard technology startup in the past. And then if not those two things, then it gets into just evaluating you and the team. So those are key things we look for in the teams we back, which has lots of problems with it. I want to be aware that it's very kind of ends up being network driven if you're only funding the people that have received funding before, but it's not all we do.
No, it's great discussion. So the next thing that we talk about is the business development. And this is really important to think about the problem that you want the business to solve. Sometimes we talk about, okay, what a business are we creating? And the inventor will talk about their technology, and we'll say, okay, that's the technology, but what is the business? And that can be two completely different things. You really need to focus on the problem you're solving and thinking about what is the market need, not just the invention itself, because invention can be amazing, but we need to find a commercial opportunity for it and what's the fit in the marketplace for that product. So we really focus a lot of attention early on in terms of what is the problem, make sure we've really got it defined well, and then what is our solution to that problem and how does it fit together. And then once you feel like you have that, then you need to go down to the list of these things. The market validation, is there a big enough market? What's your competitive advantage? Because there's probably going to be very well-funded competitors out there. So how do we deal with that? What are the capital requirements going to be? The product development plan? All of these things need to be worked through. And it's something that we would go through step by step in terms of developing that plan as to what the business is going to be.
Michael, how often do you feel that the startups that come to you, all of which are usually funded by academic sponsors at some point, are end up going after the problem that the DoD or NSF funded them to solve? Oftentimes I see startups that are funded to solve hydrogen storage, and they think they should go sell hydrogen storage solutions. What's your view of kind of how often that the government dollars they receive are actually relevant to an important market problem?
Yeah, the government dollars are there to solve a technical need, a technical problem that hasn't been solved before, and it's not the commercial problem. So it's almost never the two. I don't find that they correlate. One example is one of our companies right now has developed a new way to produce hydrogen, and that's amazing and it's cool, but that's not the problem that needs to be solved. And you start saying, okay, well, the problem is we need clean energy. Oh, okay, so we're going to develop this new way of producing hydrogen to produce clean energy, but there's lots of different ways to produce clean energy. So what are we really trying to do? And that business, we've continued to work with them all the way to now. They're producing an alternative fuel source for drones. Now that's a problem, right? Drones have too short a flight time. Customers are really concerned about, if they want to fly a drone more than 20 minutes, how are they going to come up with a solution for that? And today there's virtually nothing out there, maybe 40 minutes, but you're not going to get above an hour with the lithium battery. So how do you extend that life? That's a problem. And this technology can solve that problem. And so, we need to work with the teams to get to what is the real problem that we're going to solve in the marketplace. And there are going to be several iterations. But as Manny pointed out, it's almost never what the basic research was actually started at. It's some iterative process to actually work between the technology and the market. What does the market say it needs and what can the solution provide, and bring the two together.
Yeah, I can't agree more. Like it's like another example. Examples are always useful. One of the companies we've invested in, it's a company called Everactive. I think 10 years ago, they spun out of a university and they do ultra low power semiconductor chips. Like you can run these chips on the light underneath your desk, and that was built. It was funded for, I think it was by NIH, to build pacemakers that didn't need batteries. And so their initial instinct was, okay, we've got to go build a medical device, because that's what they were funded. That's what they had spent time and thinking about the problem. And it took time, but they ended up revisiting the market side of it and understanding what was the right product to build for the market and where to apply their technology. And so we always look for like we're in a great position. We always, in seeing university startups, we always look for the people that can take a step back and say, okay, given what I've built on the technology side, where's the best place for me to apply it? And it's because oftentimes the science that's an underpinning for these startups is so big, we're willing to take a risk on the technology if the business opportunity is big enough. And so oftentimes it's about coming up with a bigger market story than you may have initially been funded to go after.
And just to add to that, I would say sometimes the discussion is, what is the best market to go after first? It's not necessarily that we're ruling out other potential uses for the technology, but sometimes one market may need to be prioritized over another to give the company the fastest route and the best chance of success. Just also what we talk about in terms of business development is partnerships. And I think it's always important to remember that very few businesses are built alone. They're built in partnership with other people, other companies, and there are lots of other places to go to seek assistance. We do a lot with strategic corporate partners. We've actually found partners that are willing to give money to a startup, really not asking for anything in exchange, because to get equity in your company just creates an accounting nuisance for them. They'd rather just give you a couple $100,000 to promote your applied research, take your basic research and try to apply it to something that would make sense for them. Sort of an outsourced R&D for them. And so there's lots of different ways to involve partners. So capital acquisition. This is very interesting having Manny here to talk about his perspective on this as well. There's lots of different ways you'll see on this list of different ways to access capital. The biggest thing I will say here, and I'll let Manny talk about this slide more than me, is just that it's what I have found through 20 years of doing this, that establishing a relationship first makes a huge difference in your ability to get money, to get investment from somebody. You know, people don't tend to invest in strangers. They want to invest in people they know and trust. And so you've got to build that relationship. So we often tell people that if you go and ask somebody for money, they'll give you advice. If you go and ask somebody for advice and build a relationship, they just might give you money. So always start from the perspective of, I need to build a relationship with this potential investor.
Amazing how I feel like it should happen more, where the academics, the researchers, the PIs that we know don't often come to us in between financing needs. And so it's something that I think is really important to do. You know, our whole mission in venture is to get to know. Like, we want to be investing we pass on many more deals than we do. And we need any excuse. We'll find any excuse to say no. And your job as potential entrepreneurs is to give us, lots of reasons to say yes. One of which is, do we like working with you? And that doesn't come through a one-off pitch call. It oftentimes comes through, sending me questions in the interim, or sharing something you thought was interesting, hopefully relevant to what you do, but just building relationships. Because if you do that, then we build a different kind of relationship than just a financial one. And we also want to be helpful to you. So even when we're not necessarily going to get over the line on giving you money, think of starting a company as, the deepest tree of your life, where you have networks upon networks upon networks that you'll need to access to get to the endpoint of becoming $1 billion corporation. And that's going to mean leveraging your friends and family. It's going to mean leveraging the people you know, so that I reach out to people I know who hopefully will help you get to what you need. And that's really important to do. And that's where I found the most successful companies are oftentimes the ones that have been able to develop an amazing product, but then also get the financing to get there. And so there's one thing about having an incredible product market fit, and a good market to go after, that's great. But if you don't have the fundraising chops to do it, then that's what we just call financing risk. And that's real risk. Like, if we don't think that you are going to be able to track down the fundraising to get to where you want to be, where you need to be, it's racked up there just as significantly as technology risk and team risk. And so it's some of the things we think about, especially in the university spin-out space, where these companies need a lot of money to get to an endpoint.
And one thing I'll add is that this discussion about establishing a relationship, getting to know people, it applies even applying for an SBIR grant. A lot of people think, oh, I'm submitting a grant to the government. They don't want to hear from me. I'll send my grant application in by the deadline, and they'll get back to me whether it's approved. That's not the way SBIRs work. They actually want to talk to you. Representatives and program managers at the NIH and the NSF, they want to hear from you. And it's so much easier for them to say yes to a grant proposal if they know it's coming. If they get one on their desk and they're like, oh yeah, I talked to this guy, I like this technology, or yeah, this woman called me, I really understand what they're trying to do here. It makes a big difference. And so many people are surprised by that one. I'll ask a team, have you called them yet? And they're like, call the NSF? like, yeah, you need to call them and tell them it's coming and talk to them about what you're trying to do. Makes a big difference.
Yeah, we used to joke at Lockheed, the first time you saw an RFP was when it was posted on I forgot what the government website was, but if the first time you saw an RFP was when it got posted, you already lost. And so just responding to solicitations for money is not, it's not the efficient way to go after getting it. I can pontificate a little more on venture capital. There's, many flavors of venture capital. I'll start kind of after the angels side of this. And, there's seed investors who think of them as your first $500,000 to $3 million $3 million of investment. There are institutional venture capital investors who will invest, sort of in the range of $2 to $15 million checks, but then potentially 50 million, into any one individual company, depending on who they are. And then there's corporate or strategic VCs who are coming from what's become really popular in the past 5 or 10 years, but has existed for a very long time, of sort of mission-driven investors out of large corporations that are really interesting people to get to know and work with, because over the years they've started to invest real dollars, obviously, but then also help generate revenue, generating pilots for companies and contracts for companies. So those are the flavors. And one thing we always are happy to do is connect startups. Most investors are happy to connect startups to other investors, but we don't want to do the work for you. So, we don't want to have to brainstorm who's right for you. We'll do it, but it's much more effective if you show us that you've done some homework and said, hey, this has been a really helpful conversation. Do you have any other people that you think I should connect with? I thought, X fund and Y fund were particularly relevant to my startup. Do you have anyone there that you can introduce me to? And that's how you expand your tree, is not, not just asking, but showing why you think it's something that would be good, and that you've done your homework on it. The last thing I'll say is it's a really good time to raise venture capital, even during COVID, but we're about to hopefully see our way out of COVID. In general, there's a ton of venture capital dollars in the market. It's a really competitive environment right now on my side, where startups are getting much higher valuations than they would have 10 years ago. But it's because there's been a lot of activity and a lot of success stories. So make sure that you are reaching out across a broad network, meeting a lot of different VC funds, not just settling for the first term sheet that you get, but also be aware that it's not just about the valuation that you get from the VC or seed fund. It's about what they're bringing to your team and how it matches to what you need right now. The needs of a seed investment are very different than a Series C investment, a Series C or Series D later stage investment. A seed investment, you want a venture capital firm that's hopefully going to help you figure out what your team should look like. What are the most important things to achieve in a pilot? And do they set you up for a great Series A? And so all of those things can be much more valuable than a couple extra million in valuation.
For SBI, and this is for both of you, for SBIRs and STTRs, are profit interests considered differently from ownership interests under U.S. citizenship? Is there minimum ownership requirements for these grants?
Yeah, the minimum ownership is 50% owned by U.S. citizens. Profit interests are basically in an LLC considered the same as units. They're just they tend to be non-voting, but they're pretty much the same. You actually own the equity. It's not like an option where you don't actually own the equity. It's an option to purchase. You actually own it. So yeah, on a fully diluted basis, those would be considered the same. All right, so structuring investment, we could probably talk between Manny and I. We could talk for a long time on this slide, and obviously we don't have all day to be able to do that. But Manny and I can pick out some things here that's interesting to us. There's convertible equity and there's actual equity. A lot of people are moving into SAFEs these days, simple agreements for future equity instead of convertible notes. What that basically says is somebody's going to make an investment in your company. they're going to get a certain amount of equity for it. You just don't know how much yet because you can't adequately value the business today. So someday in the future, maybe an institutional investor is going to invest in your company and they will pick the valuation. And then at that point, you'll decide how much this prior person that invested is going to get of your company, usually with a discount off of that round. And that's a simple agreement for future equity. We spent a lot more time talking about those. The only thing I'll say, and I'll hand it off to Manny in terms of equity investments, is that when you're negotiating with a venture capitalist, don't just pay attention to the valuation. That's one of the simplest things to figure out as to what your company is going to be worth. There's so many other ways that a venture capitalist will try to create value for themselves. I used to be one, just like Manny. I know the games you play to try to create value. And so as an owner of a company, number one, don't just read the front page of the term sheet. And number two, get help from an experienced advisor who can point out some of the pitfalls in the term sheet to make sure you're aware of how the company is going to be structured post-investment.
Yeah, with so many things, even preceding this slide, there's a lot of starting a company that's and running a startup that's just standard. And like I said, don't try and do anything special with the legal framework of your company or how you build it or how you give equity and how you decide to take investment. Like, get a lawyer. Like, it's just really helpful just to make everything vanilla and standard. Yeah, but Michael's right. We could talk all day about this. I'll highlight, just reiterate what Michael was saying about valuation. You know, for one, it's not the most important thing. It's one of, but it's not the most important thing. You really want to be able to work with the investors that are giving you money. And, you know, just to have a top of mind example, you know, we were doing a deal alongside, we wanted to invest in a company. It's a very large round, so there were multiple investors coming in. And, you know, when a firm wants to invest in your startup, they give you what's called a term sheet. And a term sheet can be for any one of these vehicles that are on this page, a note, a safe, or equity investment. And it's basically just a non-binding description of like what we want to do, how we want to structure the investment. And so most entrepreneurs just zoom right to valuation, but it's non-binding. Like, everyone can sign it. And then, you know, through the agreement, through the diligence process that then occurs between the term sheet and giving you money, it can be a month or a couple months, and a lot can happen in between then. You could have some bad data. A teammate could leave. You know, there could be something that happens in the markets. But so in this example, I'm going to explain. The valuation changed. The investors that ended up wanting to come into the round decided they wanted a lower valuation, and before that term sheet was signed, there had been a previous investor that was, for all intents and purposes, a better, more value-add investor who was beat out on valuation by a lot. You know, let's just call it, a $40 million valuation that they offered. The term sheet that was accepted was a $60 million valuation, and that's who the company went with. And in the process of diligence, that valuation crept down to 48. And so then you have this situation where some investors that were involved said, well, maybe we should have gone with the original group. So you want to optimize for multiple things. But to get to what Michael was referring to on how VCs play games with numbers, you know, it's all transparent. Like, there's no way of, if you're an educated entrepreneur, if you've done your job learning about it, there's no number that you wouldn't understand, especially given that most of you have at least significant math training. There's a great book everyone should read as you're starting a company. It's called Venture Deals by Brad Feld. There's lots of books similar to it. There's actually one that's more life science focused, but Venture Deals by Brad Feld just goes through all the different permutations of financings that occur in venture deals. And so read that. You can read it in like a weekend, and you'll know all you need to know, and your ears will go off at the different terms that are important. But one of the most important things for everyone to recognize is something called the liquidation preference and the participating preferred features. This is just like a general concept that it's not a game. It's just how investors have structured their investments for decades. And it's that we put our money in and we want to be the first to get it out. And so when your company exits for, let's say, $100 million, you know, just realize that if you've raised $90 million from venture investors, they're going to get that first 90 million back. And then all that's left is roughly 10 for you to split amongst the founders of the company. And you can imagine that the situation could be different where you've raised $101 million and you're being sold for $100 million, and you don't get anything back. And there's lots of different permutations of this, different multiples that people put on things, but it's just, make sure you pay more attention than just a valuation. And I'm happy to run through things like cap tables or what they're called, waterfall analyses, which show how you get paid out when you have an exit based on how much money you've raised.
And then once, a lot of these questions are answered, it really begins of getting the companies up and running. And what we do for a lot of our startup companies is really leaning on support services rather than trying to spend time and energy on non-strategic aspects of the business. These days, it's so much better to just outsource them. And that's, getting good legal advice, accounting, insurance, payroll, and benefits. And working through us, we have relationships with providers for all those things. So it's very easy to just give the company a list of phone numbers, call these people, get these set up, and let it all be taken care of in the back. So you don't need to focus on that. And that's really important. And the other thing I should mention in terms of physical location, the Pennovation Center has been going great down at the Pennovation Works campus. The Pennovation Center is mostly full. We opened a second building for inventor offices. That building is now full, and a third building is about to be finished and will come online at the beginning of 2021. So we're very excited for that, and that's mostly labs for companies that want to build labs. So the Pennovation Works campus is a great place to start your business and to be able to have the resources to be able to stay there and grow your business over time.
How long do you both expect early stage startup that's typical kind of out of Penn to remain like a small, 1 to 5 people? What is a typical timeline of growth that you tend to see?
Years ago, I think I did an analysis that helps affect, there are startups that, if you look at the cohort of successful startups, ones that have exited, they all tend to have 6 to 8 year kind of timeline to exit. There's ones that the ones that exist longer could still be doing well, but the bulk of the curve ends up being in that 6 to 8 year horizon, which feels short when you say it out loud. You bring up a topic that I've noticed recently, which is, the startups that we end up really liking that are exciting, they all end up kind of gestating on their idea for a little while. And so their data formation in their minds may be different than mine. Like when, let's say, our databases are actually tracking them as having been founded. Sometimes it's based on when they licensed the idea. Sometimes it's based on when they had their first round of financing. 1 to 2 years is kind of a good time frame for companies to exist running small, because it seems like that's the correct amount of time to really decide whether they have enough momentum and velocity to get out. In 1 to 2 years, I would have hoped that they could have gone and raised venture dollars and grown their team to something like 7 to 10. And if not, it probably just means that they've been spinning their wheels on trying to figure out the right application for their technology or product. And this is all from the framework of building a venture backable startup. Obviously, if you can build great businesses with 3 to 7 people without any venture dollars at all, and they just stay small for a long time and can still be profitable and make a lot of money for their team.
Yeah, I find that it's so spread out, even within companies in similar industries. We have one robotics company that has 16 employees and the other robotics company has 45 employees, and they're both kind of at a similar stage of development. It's just that one is building a much more technically complex product, and they need more people to get it done.
A question for you, Michael. For a Penn inventor, what circumstances favor direct outlicensing versus startup formation, which is a great question.
It is. What we have found is that a lot of the large corporate partners want university technology to look more like a product before they get involved. They want to they want to be able to see how does it fit into our business and how is it strategic to what we do. And there are many times that technology that we have at Penn may not be there yet, and we have to do some work on it. And getting investment dollars, getting research dollars to do that applied research, product development, prototype development, it's so much easier to access that kind of money when you're a company versus a university project. And so, there's a lot of times when we'll say, we should pursue a startup to try to go after some of that money because we need a prototype. We need something that we can show people that this is what the device is going to look like. This is how it's going to work. And it's just hard to do that in the lab sometimes. So that can be one reason to move to a company. Another reason can be that, that there's a significant market need and we think we have something that's differentiated and so we should go for it, as a company. And I think that's a good way to go. But I think the important thing to remember is that, my team at PCI Ventures works very closely with the licensing team. And we are always jointly thinking about what is the best option. So, we may start a company with a faculty member and start going down that path. And maybe a licensing opportunity comes up. And we all need to be adults at that point and say, what is the best option here? What is the best potential for this technology? Maybe it is that we drop the company and we pursue the license, or, because they're a large player that's well-funded and can develop it much quicker than a small company can. Or the option that comes in is from another startup company. And maybe the founders say, well, I think our startup's just as good as that startup. Let's keep going. Right. But we need to always remember to keep all of our options open as to what is the best option for the technology at that time. We're always willing to get a company started and pursue that path while keeping the licensing path open as a potential option down the road. And we just see which one gets there first. If we can get money behind the company, we get a team in there, maybe that's the direction we go. There's always going to be a license at the end of the day. It's just a matter of, do we license it to a startup company first and a bigger company later, sort of a thing.
And what about kind of the time investment required?
Yeah. So, starting a company is hard, and we definitely want to bring a team on to try to minimize the impact to a faculty member. I get lots of people come to me and say, well, I've got, research grants to write. I've got a wife and kids at home, husband and kids at home. I've got so many things going on in my life. I don't have a lot of time for this. And we always have to say, we try to minimize the amount of effort starting a company takes, but it does still take a lot of time. Conversations with potential investors, strategic partners. We want to have faculty inventors that are really committed and engaged to the project, that want to see this happen. So there is a certain amount of time commitment that's going to be there in working on a company. We just want to try to make it a fun experience, and we want always to be in good communication with everybody on the team, so that if everybody has concerns about how quickly things are moving, I will tell you, one of my frustrations and that of faculty founders is how long it takes to find the entrepreneur to run the business. Sometimes that can take us several months, and that's a frustrating time. Sometimes we have false starts. We think we found somebody and then they don't work out. Now we got to start over again and find somebody else. So it's so critical that we get that portion of the process correct, that we've really got to make sure we're patient and spend the time needed to get just the right person. As Manny said, investors, the colloquial term in the investment world is that investors back the jockey, not the horse. And so we've got to make sure that we get the management team right so that they'll get engaged and really appreciate all of the work that's gone into the technology.
Yeah. Add to that, it's also often, it's easy to then take that statement and say, oh, well, maybe that means, Michael can just take my technology and turn it into a company with the right jockey. We also believe that the founders, a core part of the team, some full-time part of the team, almost 99% of the time has to involve someone who is a part of the founding research.
Yeah.
It's just too hard to take a university technology and hand it over to an entrepreneur and have them do something with it. It's very rare. And I don't even know if we've invested in that kind of story before, but so you need that dynamic of a professor or a grad student who wants to push it forward. It's their passion, and then can also attract another colleague, another entrepreneur to work with them on it. at some point.
Okay, that's great. That's actually a good segue into the next question, which is, what is the standard timeline for a PhD student / PI project? Do students normally wait for the end of their PhD or start early?
We've had many examples of students starting early, and that's great. With the endorsement of their faculty, you know, we want to make sure that everybody's communicating as to what they're trying to do, and we'll have those discussions of, you know, is this business going to interfere with your PhD defense and the core research you need to do. And you know, we always want to make sure that graduation is a priority and that you're going to get your degree. That's what Penn is here for. We're not trying to funnel people out through the back door and not getting their degrees and having them finished. But you can, you know, with the right communication and everybody involved, start early. We have one of our companies, Hydroport, the grad student, doctoral student, is working with it now, and he's not going to finish his PhD for a couple of years yet. And that's okay. And, you know, he's a founder and his faculty advisor is a founder in the company, and they're working on it together. I think it's a great way for him to advance his research while also pursuing this commercial path. And I think they've found a way to make it go hand in hand, and it's really worked well. So you can start early. It's just a matter of communicating with everybody involved so that everybody's clear as to what's happening and how this is going to be worked into the effort that you already have in the lab.
Yeah, I think there's just too much going on at university campuses nowadays to not take advantage of the entrepreneurial ecosystem that's going on while you're doing your research, so that it can be nudged, not completely, you know, moved in a different path, but nudged in a way that really answers some of the key questions that are relevant to the startup you might create. And all that has to be done alongside a PI who's excited about that future endpoint for you. And I think if you look back 10 or 15 years ago, a lot of PIs didn't really appreciate the entrepreneurial bug, and it's totally changing. And a lot of professors now just understand that it's an interesting path for their students that can still, you know, land in deep academic research. And it's just really important for the students to get to meet the entrepreneurial centers like what Michael runs, and then also just the venture people that are around the ecosystem to learn from as you're building your ideas.
Thanks so much to you two. I love this format, and I will definitely be asking you two to do this again. It's always great to get both like the insider Penn perspective and external partner together, since it really does, we do need that partnership to make it all work and to really grow these early stage companies. So thank you so much.